And just to get back to an earlier point that you made, Matt, about USC matching up against this new contingent of teams in the Big Ten, because there was so much anticipation that we've had for the last few years, and specifically in this previous off season, to what is this going to look like? And this conference certainly has a layer of, well, Oregon's playing better than everyone, no question. Ohio State, they have the talent to right their wrongs and get back to where they would like to be. Penn State, we will see this Saturday the difference possibly between 2 and 3 and where Penn State stacks up. And then it kind of drifts off into what was expected to be USC. Iowa's been a little bit of a disappointment. Then there's just this glut of teams. There's about 10 or 12 deep where you have no idea who's going to win these games. And when you bring up Rutgers and how bad they are a horrible football team. They are just, they are supposed to be sturdy and stout. We're not expecting, fleet wide receivers that are going to be first round NFL picks, but man, USC pounded them for 6 yards per carry. Like you mentioned, Wisconsin just blew them away into submission, and they lose to UCLA. UCLA even was able to
35 points
spit in the face of the 3-time zone travel to go out to Piscataway and put up the 35 points. So that's just a lousy football team. And now USC again lines up with another team that's just kind of like USC seems to be wearing down a little through this Big Ten schedule. They had played better earlier. Now they take it on the chin by 2 scores against Indiana, against a backup quarterback. Of course, they lost to Iowa as they were just bludgeoned in the second half. So they're taking on a decent, as you phrased it about as well as you can with these Big Ten, this mid tier, that they're okay teams. They're decent teams, but they're nothing that USC shouldn't be able to handle. And our projection, largely between the two of us, was fairly similar in our approach to this season, that this was going to be a really good, like, top 15 team in the country, somewhere in that range, 15 to 20. I picked them to go 8-4, but to go and beat LSU on opening night, to be able to take Penn State to overtime and really outplay them for most of the game, and to have that same team go out to Maryland, who's otherwise 0-4 in the Big Ten. They can't beat anyone. They lost to Northwestern.
And they're losing blowouts to the bottom half of the Big Ten. Yes.
And again, I think Minnesota's a little bit better than maybe we thought a month ago, but still they're not a really good football team.
Minnesota went down to the wire with UCLA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, to you, what can be gained out of all of this in regards to playing, decidedly better than Nebraska and Washington and some of these teams that can move into the off season in terms of momentum, but real tangible progress?
Well, so Rutgers was a bad team, and against a bad Rutgers team, USC's offensive line looked good. But against moderately better opposition, USC's offensive line has not been able to dominate a game. I mean, the LSU game really was the LSU and Penn State games were the two best non-Rutgers, non-Utah State. Like, let's just shove aside Utah State because that's a total cupcake game. In terms of like big boy meaningful games, the LSU and Penn State games were the best from USC's offensive line. But even then, those were games where for at least a quarter and a half, the USC offensive line didn't play well. I mean, the USC offensive line was good against LSU, but there was like at least 15, 20 minutes of gameplay when LSU's defensive line was able to outplay USC. And then, of course, against Penn State, first half was magnificent, but then Penn State's defensive line stopped USC in the third quarter, early into the fourth quarter. USC has the great drive to take the 30-23 lead midway through the fourth, but then at the end of regulation and then in overtime, the offensive line couldn't do well. So like USC's ceiling in terms of the offensive line playing well against a reasonably good opponent, LSU, Penn State, any Big Ten road game, the ceiling has been, I would say, to be fair, 40 minutes. I think you could say that USC's offensive line has played 40 good minutes against some of its better opponents, but that's just 2/3 of a game. And with the margins being relatively small, the margins being what they are, that's not necessarily going to cut it. And so the offensive line is where USC has to make the biggest jump. Now, obviously, USC needs more depth on defense, but the thing is, you have that proven defensive staff, and I think that Danton Lynn, Coach Henney, woof, and Matt Entz, like they should be able to recruit because people can see how much better this defense is, and like guys should want to play for them. Guys should see that they're going to get quality player development on an NFL track. But it's that offensive line where Josh Henson, he and Lincoln Riley, like they need to be honest with each other. Lincoln and Henson have to have a roadmap which says, okay, are you going to be able to land some 5 stars? Are you going to be able to land some skull crushers, some bone crushers? Like we can't let Dan Lanning and other top programs in the West or in the Big Ten outfight us for the really, really big fish. USC has to start landing the really big fish, the biggest fish in the pond. Like losing Josh Connerly to Oregon. I mean, USC fans might try to minimize that particular recruiting loss all they want, but can we just admit, with Oregon's offensive line playing well and the Ducks being number 1 in the country, can we just admit how big a recruiting loss that was and still is? Like, I know USC fans hate Oregon, but you just have to square with the reality in terms of how important it was for Oregon to win that recruitment and how damaging it was for USC to not win that recruitment. So if there is no roadmap, if there is no strong plan and strong likelihood that Josh Henson is going to land 5 stars in December for 2025, he's got to go. He has to be gone. Like you can't just settle for mediocrity. And the place we've arrived at with Josh Henson, it's the place we arrived at with Alex Grinch, really in the Cotton Bowl, but like for sure, in the Utah and Washington games last year, like it became certain that this is not the best USC can do. USC can do better. Like that fundamentally is why you fire a coach, right? Like, you've hit your ceiling. You're never, ever going to get better than what you have. You gave the guy his chance. The experiment's run its course. That's it. I think we're there with Josh Henson. And the only thing that would make me reconsider is what I've pointed to earlier. Can he land 5 stars? Can he dramatically upgrade the level of talent on the offensive line? Because, and this kind of completes the circle here, what Lincoln Riley and Josh Henson, but it falls mostly on Lincoln Riley. What Lincoln Riley didn't really understand, or maybe he gambled and he tried to convince himself that his gamble was going to be worth it. But where Lincoln Riley fell short was, all right, I don't have a Caleb Williams. I don't have a Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, elite talent at quarterback this time. Miller Moss, as I've said, when the offensive line is playing great for him, he's a really good quarterback. It all works out. The Rutgers game kind of reaffirmed that basic truth. But if you don't have a Superman type quarterback, all right, you need your offensive line to be elite. And that, in terms of roster construction for 2024 at USC, Lincoln Riley didn't piece that together. He, realizing, okay, I don't have a Superman quarterback. I have a really good, smart game manager who can make the quick throw, who can make the check down. but he's not going to be able to run for 35 yards when a play breaks down. He's not going to be able to stuff the highlight reel. And consider what Cam Ward is doing for Miami. Cam Ward has turned a Mario Cristobal team into a Lincoln Riley team. Miami is winning games 52-45 and 37-34 and 39-38. It's so wild that Miami is winning games the way Lincoln Riley used to win at Oklahoma and then in 2022 at USC. But why is that the case? It's because Miami has a Superman quarterback. And Lincoln Riley with Miller Moss was not a Superman quarterback. That's not a criticism of Miller Moss. We all knew he's not going to be able to win games himself. He's going to need help from the other 10 guys on his offensive unit. But if you don't have a Superman quarterback, man, your offensive line has to set the bar very, very high. And Lincoln Riley, both in recruiting, which partly falls on Josh Henson, and also in the transfer portal, did not get the reinforcements to put Miller Moss in the best possible position to succeed. So that was the central roster construction failure of Lincoln Riley and Josh Henson in 2024. And so if they can't land the really big fish, I don't see any legitimately good reason to keep Josh Henson on board for 2025. And USC needs to find its Danton Lynn, Eric Henderson equivalent of an offensive line coach to raise the bar at that position, especially in recruiting, but of course also, getting the technique and the teaching and the player development. So that really is, to me, the central problem right now for USC. We can talk about NIL, and the ways in which that all has to be restructured. But like Lincoln Riley, a year too late, but he got around to it. He upgraded his defensive staff. Now he needs to make that same kind of upgrade at the offensive line coaching position. If he can do that, if he can get the right guy, the way we feel that Danton Lynn is the right guy for this defense, USC could be really, really good in 2025. But now, does Lincoln Riley have the clarity and the boldness to make that decision? And is Jen Cohen going to be able to exert enough influence on Lincoln Riley to say, hey, we need to get this offensive line and specifically offensive line recruiting in alignment? Lincoln, you need to make a tough choice. I can't just let you wing it. You're going to have to arrive at a real decision here. Do we have a plan to upgrade our recruiting and our talent at that position group? Jen Cohen needs to be involved in that conversation. She can't just let Lincoln Riley fly freely here. Too much on the line, right? So that is the central issue in my mind at USC right now.
The total defense numbers aren't the end all be all, but it's an indication of how well the defense is playing. 72nd in the nation in total defense, number 80 in yards per play against. I was going to guess that the numbers were a little bit better than that because when I look at the defensive performance, again, based on the expectation of the team, based on what was reasonable, the thought was the offense should be near elite, should be really, really good, should be top 20, 25. And then if the defense can be in the 50 to 70 range, much better than what it's been in the past, that was a reasonable expectation of what Danton Lynn could provide, and also a reasonable expectation of the athleticism on this team. It's been my thought that really just it's been in recent weeks that the secondary's been beat up a little bit, that obviously Bear Alexander, I don't know that he was that much of a presence, but another body along the defensive front, that they've had some attrition that has really hurt their defensive performance over the last few weeks. Otherwise, I think it's generally hit the mark of what the expectations were and should have been.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. USC has had so much attrition over the past month, and it's been key players. Eric Gentry was the first really big piece to fall in late September. That was bound to have an effect. And then you lose Anthony Lucas late in the Minnesota game, and that proved to be pivotal in that Minnesota lost. That, you already have Gentry out, you have Bear Alexander out because of his transfer, and Anthony Lucas. Now, without Eric Gentry and Bear Alexander, USC was still containing Minnesota. 10 points allowed in the first 50 minutes of that game. But Anthony Lucas was the straw that broke the camel's back. Like, at some point you lose a certain number of high-level players on your defense. At some point, that is going to have an effect, especially for a program that, does not currently have the kind of depth that a Georgia, an Alabama, an Ohio State does on defense. We knew that USC wasn't at that elite level in terms of depth. So you lose your high-profile players, that's bound to have an effect. So, yeah, I mean, you can't really blame D'Anton Lynn for a situation that he largely inherited. Like, he's doing the best he can. Like, his plan against Rutgers was really good. You want to force Kaliakmanis to throw the ball a lot. That's exactly what happened. Like, that was a smart game plan. Like, this guy knows his X's and O's. USC has not been able to get a pass rush. That's been, that really showed up against Penn State in the fourth quarter with Drew Auer making that comeback against the Trojans. But so I don't think you can say that guys haven't been in position to make plays. Like, one of the things with the secondary, guys are in position to make plays, but we've seen several times receivers out jumping USC defensive backs on 50-50 balls, USC defenders not timing their jumps as well. Like, not they might locate the ball, but then they don't go get the ball and they're out jumped for a ball. But it's not as though they're out of position. Like, that was the Alex Grinch problem. They weren't even in position. Also, Dante Williams as well. Doug Belk has largely had these guys in position to make plays, but they're not finishing. And so, to me, the coaching deficit with this team, it's, there's a little bit of Lincoln Riley there. Like, his decision to kick the field goal against Maryland was an absolutely atrocious decision. Like, you can't trust your offensive line to get 1 yard against Maryland in the fourth quarter. Like, what does that say about a coach's willingness to trust his players? So that was horrible. And of course, he hasn't been able to coach toughness in a team. And for people who might be inclined to say you can't coach toughness, no. That is definitely part of a coach's job. And it's not just the weight room either. Like, I haven't been mentioning Benny Wiley because, I don't think it's been a case where, raw physicality has been the problem. Like, the problem with the offensive line is that, miscommunications, two guys go to one blocker, another rusher comes free around the edge. It hasn't been, raw physical strength. I mean, there have been moments where guys have been overpowered, but a lot of the times it's just miscommunication. Like, Josh Henson has not really coached up these guys really well. But just to kind of, draw back and go full circle with this USC team, and in terms of, what the issue really is, not being able to rise to the occasion in these high leverage situations is really the common thread in all of these losses. USC led in the fourth quarter in each of its first 7 games and was 3-4. Now, that's hard to do. It is hard to consistently lose games that you lead in the fourth quarter. And so, that's why I don't think this is a strength and conditioning issue. It's not something I'm going to put at the feet of Benny Wiley, but, Lincoln Riley's made some questionable chess moves, but also Josh Henson has just not been able to get this offensive line consistent enough so that when you need that tough yard, you need that one late first down to run out the clock and not entrust this game to a battered, shorthanded defense. The offense is the unit that, much more than the defense, has left something on the table and is the main reason why this team is 4-4 instead of at least 6-2, possibly 7-1.